Fence sitting is kind of a plague on our society. And I'm not saying that, it's an issue when your cousin Jeff, who works in HR at a random company, fence sits and doesn't really take a stance on a social or political issue. I'm talking about when, content creators who have a lot of clout and a lot of prestige and a lot of followers refuse to take a position on any sort of issue that's going around society today and any issue that's important in society today. And the reason why I kind of want to talk about this is just because a clip has been going around. I think it started circulating yesterday, and I kind of saw it for the first time today. And the clip is about Emaru, who I think on her stream she was asked by one of her chatters, what her thoughts on ICE was, just because ICE obviously is in the news much more than they have ever been, ever. Most recently because their execution of Alex Peretti in Minnesota, who came 2.5 weeks after, the murder of Renee Good. Now, unfortunately, though, when Emma was asked what, her opinion on ICE was, instead of like giving a take and saying, hey, ICE is bad, ICE has murdered 2 people, I don't think it's a really good thing, she instead just said this.
Like, there's a certain extent where I'm like, okay, sure, I get people wanting big content creators to like say their opinions on like important topics. I get that, right? But it's like, if you need a streamer who doesn't even know anything about politics to tell you about politics, you probably just need to like get off the internet. Like, just stop. Like hello? Like, I don't, like, what? Like, how am I gonna, I don't know, get help? Like, even like,
and obviously that's just kind of like a really kind of easy cop-out throwaway, just saying, hey, I don't really know anything about politics, I'm not the most political person, I don't think I'm the person you should be getting your politics from. But the issue is with this is that I don't think the person was asking Amaru to be like, hey, Amaru, whatever you say here about ICE and about the situation with ICE is going to be my opinion from this point on. I think the person and people who do ask these questions to streamers who like kind of don't really have political stances, but kind of like maybe has a take on a social or political issue, is to see if, they're a good person or not. It's kind of a gauge on whether or not people like want to continue watching you to see if like are a good person. If you just go out and say, hey, ICE just murdered 2 people, and that's not really a good thing, I think that ICE is obviously overstepping their boundaries and like just, or even like going in further and saying ICE is a terrible thing overall. Any sort of condemnation of ICE and any sort of like width of the spectrum here would have worked. I don't think anyone says, oh, well, Emaru said her take about ICE, I'm going to follow that now. The issue is that silence here is rather a worse thing, especially with who Emaru has historically associated herself with in the past. A picture going around like this one kind of makes it seem like, unfortunately, Emaru maybe is in support of ICE. Asmongold, who's become one of the most famous right-wing grifters of our time, Tectone, who also pivoted into being a right-wing grifter and also has been, found liable in civil lawsuits for, being sexually abusive. And then Lakari, who pulled up links to child pornography on his stream. So when this happens, and when you take a politically neutral stance, people just kind of look at who you associate yourselves with and think to themselves, well, if she doesn't really want to say, and we look at, her being around Asmongold and Tectone, who have been, right-wing grifters, maybe she also thinks that way, but also just doesn't want to throw away the community that she built because she knows her community maybe will push more back against that. And I'm not saying this is what she thinks. I'm just saying that this is the difficulty that it comes to when you're taking a fence-sitting position in this area, and a quote-unquote apolitical stance, and such a clear-cut issue of ICE executing people. Maybe she does think that, like, ICE is obviously a bad thing, and she just doesn't want to alienate part of her audience who may think otherwise. But, like, in this scenario, I feel like it's kind of hard to just fence it here. For one, once again, who you associate yourself with, and two, just how clear-cut bad the actions of ICE are. It is the easiest thing to just say, I think ICE is a bad thing right now. It's literally like the most brownie points thing you can possibly do is just, as a streamer, is just like, hey, I think this is bad, and then boom, you're gone. And I think someone who had a really good take on, like, the issue with kind of fence-sitting now is a creator known as Sean the Black, who basically said that, like, fence-sitting as a content creator now, especially like a really famous one, like kind of taking this apolitical stance, is kind of going out of style and kind of just stopping to work anymore. Because, as you know, the online space is kind of a more polarized place to be. It's increasingly more people who are aware of politics, or other people who are online, who consistently spend their time online, and who would spend their time watching like YouTube or Twitch. And so, like, their audiences will care about what you have to say about issues, like political issues or social issues, Not because they're trying to formulate their opinion based on what you say, but more to check to see if the people whose content they're consuming is aligned with their values. And so, kind of just to like repeat this point for the 50th time, fence sitting is kind of an issue here because your community wants to see what your takes are on this, like on these massive issues, to see if you're a good person on it, if they want to keep on watching it. And kind of someone who, like, I guess has kind of made this maneuver as of recently, and like the past half a year maybe, to actually more like speaking on politics and actually taking a side, is Moist Critical or Penguin Zero. You know, a lot of people had called him God's gift to fence sitting, the most fence sitting man of all time. He literally had so many memes online of him just like not taking a stance. And historically speaking, he kind of just does that. But as of recently, he has actually started to like take sides. And he doesn't really do the most in-depth, insane, like video essay, hour-long shit. But he at least is willing to, you know, take a stance on these massive issues. And it's not even like, you know, the clear-cut things. Like, he obviously has taken stances on ICE being a bad thing, and also just the terrible handling of the Epstein files in the administration. Two very clear issues to take a side on, very easy. But he also has, you know, taken a side on Israel-Palestine and called out, you know, Israel and Benjamin Netanyahu, their attempts to, you know, run flack and propaganda for Israel in American social media, and also their actions just being abhorrent overall. If the dude whose entire online existence has been kind of parodized and satirized to become the epitome of what it means to be a fence sitter, if he's able to take stances on the issue, you should be able to. Because once again, he's not going in depth, bringing up fucking theory and bringing up, you know, historic evidences in the entire history of ICE, Israel, Palestine, or the Epstein files. When he's taking a stance, he's just saying this shit sucks and it's bad. And that's kind of like legitimately all you need to do in this scenario. That's literally all Emiru needed to do in this scenario, is just take a side. And so, like, I'm obviously not just like attacking Emiru only specifically. I know she's not the only person who does this. Like, I covered 2-3 days ago about someone trying to take an apolitical stance on the inclusion of civil rights movements in Minecraft as an educational aspect. And so, like, I think it's just the big issue is there's certain things you can't fence sit on, especially if you're someone who has such a large reach as Emiru does, or someone who's a big content creator, because your audience is growing more and more aware of these issues as they spend more and more time online, and as just these issues get more and more divisive. And so, like, it's gonna get to a breaking point, a flashpoint, where you just at some point are going to have to take a stand on this stuff, even if it makes you uncomfortable. Because, like, once again, in issues like ICE, it's not like you can just say, "Oh, I don't know anything about these scenarios. I don't know anything about ICE killing people in Minnesota," when it is literally the most in-your-face news story of the year so far. And so, I think the moral of the story here is that, once again, if you do make content on the internet and have a community, or are trying to grow a community, it is kind of important to throw the gauntlet down when it comes to these issues and say, like, "Hey, this is who I am." So not that, you know, people can like see you and say, "Oh, these are my new ideas now," but to see whether or not you're a person who is good and morally in good standing and someone that people want to support. Now, do I think, you know, my opinion here is going to have any sway on the downfall of fence sitting content creators? No. Why would it ever? Why would it ever have any sway at all in any capacity? Who am I to talk about this? But if I'm willing to have my lack of interest and lack of standing on the internet and take this stance despite having legitimately no one to come to my aid, if you have thousands of people willing to do it, it should be significantly easier for you to do so. And so the moral of the story today is stop fence sitting and take a stance for once in your life. And that's kind of all I got to really say for today. It's kind of like it's kind of all over the place, as a lot of my videos are. I kind of just see shit online that like annoy me enough to wait you want to talk about it and take a stance. And if you know anything, I hope the moral of the story today is once again stop fence sitting. That's all I got. Thank you for watching. Goodbye.